All right, let's talk about the Odysseus lunar lander because a lot of you guys have been asking why I've been silent about this. Well, number one, I've been busy traveling, and so I haven't had time to sit down and really edit a video about it. But number two, I wanted to talk to an expert in this video. That's Dr. Phil Metzger. So we're going to be hearing some commentary from him about his perspective on the lunar lander. Was it a success or was it a failure? Well, of course, everything didn't go completely as planned. Actually, Odysseus and I have something in common, which is that we both broke our legs. Okay, too soon? But really, Odysseus did have some issues landing. It tipped over. Scott Manley pointed out that number one, this mission had a budget that is 0.1% of the Apollo program. So a much smaller budget, yet with little money to work with, they've still had a lot of successes. First of all, they are the first commercially built lander to make it to the surface of the moon. They're the first American spacecraft to return to the moon since NASA's Apollo era ended in 1972. Also the first private lander to transmit data back to Earth. And also, and this is really important to point out, they have successfully flight proven the capabilities of liquid methane and liquid oxygen propulsion in deep space. Plus, there's still a little hope on the horizon. Odysseus might be woken up again in about 3 weeks. Odysseus landed at the southernmost location where any craft has ever landed on the moon. Unfortunately, the Intuitive Machines team believes Odysseus hit the lunar surface hard upon landing, sending it into a skid as the engines continued to fire. When they throttled down, Odysseus slowly tipped over at a 30-degree angle on what flight controllers now believe is a gentle slope. So Odysseus does have the capability to generate solar power, but the sun has to return in a few weeks. So Odysseus is currently taking a nap, I guess you could say. The question is, can the Intuitive Machines team once again establish a signal with Odysseus when the sun is once again illuminating the craft's solar panels? That remains to be seen, and that could happen around the same time that we see the third Starship launch, so that'd be pretty cool. Intuitive Machines was part of NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program, or CLPS. NASA paid them $118 million to take scientific payloads to the moon, which NASA says yielded valuable insights for which they hoped. I haven't talked about the lunar lander yet of Odysseus and Intuitive Machines, partially because, I just don't want to embarrass someone for breaking their leg. I've broken my leg and I know what it's like. I'm kidding, but really, I've been busy, and so it's time to talk about it. And so, I don't know how much you're following it. We are hoping that Odie wakes up in a couple weeks. There's a possibility. Obviously, a lot of the kind of mainstream Americans are wondering, was this a success? Was it not? So let's break it down.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about it a lot, following it, and I've had so many interviews with newspapers and radio and TV over the last week because of the mission. Because, I tweeted about some things on X, Twitter X, and a lot of people in the media thought it was interesting. So I got so many calls. But yeah, a lot of these reporters are asking the question, was it a success or not? It's like you want to boil it down to, it was a success or it was a failure. Which is it? And so I'm on the side of saying it was a success. It was a really cool mission. I mean, yeah, a little bit a problem there, broke a leg, fell over, didn't have a great radio communication, and so got less data back. But there was so much that went right on that mission. The fact that they got to the moon, did orbital insertion, they deorbited, they did entry and descent, they did landing, they actually did stick the landing before it fell over. They did establish radio contact, they did get a lot of data back and pictures. And so I'd even say it was like a 99% success when you consider how many things went right. One little laser altimeter problem, which really boils down to a pre-launch procedural problem that caused this string of other failures. And here's the good thing. They will never make that mistake again. It was just a procedure. They forgot to unsafe the lasers before launch.
I was reading about that, and not only did they just randomly kind of check that early, which if they hadn't, then they would have had minutes to probably not figure it out. But how bad does that person feel that,
Oh,
slipped
I
up?
can't imagine. I can't imagine. I think NASA paid like 180 million or 188 million. That was just NASA. There were other customers. So the total cost of the mission was hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah,
And they still got a huge amount of value from it. It didn't
right,
zero the value. I would say it was so much of a success that I would say NASA got their full money's worth out of it. But for as small amount as NASA paid for a planetary landing. But yeah, the person who forgot to unsafe the lasers pre-launch, and I don't know if they had a procedure. Did they check it off that it was done, even though it wasn't done? I
right.
don't know, but they must have felt so bad. And
Oh, I
oh, and I got
bet.
to tell you this. So I've been flying lasers on a rocket in Mojave in California. So I've been working on a sensor. Started way back when I was at NASA, and then when I got to the University of Central Florida, we came up with a way to extend the concept of this sensor. And so I partnered with Addie Dove, Dr. Addie Dove at UCF. And so we built this laser-based sensor. It shoots 4 laser beams: red, green, blue, and violet. Um, and we put it on a rocket. And so during a lunar landing, the lasers shine down through the blowing dust, and we've developed methods to extract information from the scattered light in those laser beams. So we have cameras watching the scattering light, and right now we're still developing the algorithms, but we have an engineer in our group writing some new cutting edge algorithms to extract the data. But so we were putting these eye hazard lasers. They're so bright that even just the instantaneous light beam going across your eyeball and you're blinded for life. There's no recovery. So this is what happens with these lasers. They would instantly blind you for life. Because of that, you've got to have really sure way to make them safe for ground testing, because you cannot take the risk of somebody accidentally bumping a switch and it coming on. You know, you've got to know that when it's off and it's not coming on. That means you design in a method of ensuring it can't accidentally come on. In other words, you're designing into the system a single point failure, and you've got to remember to undo that failure before launch.
Wow.
Because if you forget to undo that before launch, there is no way to turn it on. It is designed to not be overridable by intent, to protect people working around it. So that's what happened. Was they had a safing system designed to be a single point failure, and they just forgot to unsafe it before launch. And then that caused the altimeter to not work. They did this patch. The patch helped, but it didn't give them real-time computer updates. So the lander thought it was 100 meters higher than it was. So it hadn't finished slowing down. It hadn't finished the translational velocity. So it hit the ground going too fast. It skidded, broke a leg, and fell over. Everything that happened bad came down to that one procedural problem. If they hadn't made that procedural problem, who knows, maybe the whole mission would have been perfect.
Oh my gosh. What a bummer.
Yeah,
That's
but the point, the positive side of that is that's all it was. It was just a procedural problem, and they'll never make that mistake again. I guarantee that.
it's amazing to me. Just I mean, there are so many things to keep track of and, make sure that you've done correctly. Especially when things are going into space. It's the littlest things. It's like the big things you get right, and then you forget about something. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So here's some just b-roll of the lander. And Ross has a good question for you here. What lessons need to be learned from the IM-1 mission about how to safely land a tall upright lander on the moon, and are there implications for Starship HLS?
Well, yeah. So a lot of folks have been saying that it was a mistake to try to land a tall lander on the moon, and I respectfully disagree. I think it's a legitimate design choice. Of course, if you had a short, squatty lander, then you're going to have more margin against tipping over. But a well-designed system can land upright on the moon like that. And so if you're willing to design all your systems to function with less margin, you can do that. So if you've got legitimate reasons why you need to give up some of that margin, then it is a legitimate design decision. And so, it was, I think probably if they hadn't made that one pre-launch procedural error, they probably would have landed upright because it was designed well. It was really smart people. They had a system to zero out the velocity before touchdown, and it just didn't know the altitude because the laser wasn't coming on. So I think it would have been all a success. But along the way over the past week, everybody thinking and talking about it, it was interesting. I did the math on how tippy a lander would be on the moon versus on Earth. Like if this is your lander, so it's taller. This is my microphone, the microphone box, by the way. Actually, let's use a phone. It's a little taller. So this is the vehicle, and it's got the legs that come out to the corners of the phone. So this is the aspect ratio, and actually, yeah. Okay. Well, anyways, um, I'm trying to find a show and tell object using what I've got available. Okay, this one is skinnier. So taller and skinny, the legs come out wider. Okay, so
Yeah.
imagine legs coming out. So on the moon, if you're sliding sideways, you've got this kinetic energy. And then when the leg touches down, here's the leg, it touches and it tips up and over that leg. It has to go up and over as it falls. And so it's on that leg, it's lifting up as it goes over. And the question is the sideways energy enough to overcome the potential energy to lift it up? But the thing is, the sideways energy doesn't depend on gravity, but the energy to lift, to tip it, does depend on gravity. So you're reducing the potential energy that it has to overcome, but you're not reducing the energy that it has, which as it comes in. And
Oh,
so it takes less sideways velocity to tip it over on the moon. So you can do the calculation, like if the lander is shaped like the IM lander, and if it's right at the limit of tipping with legs shaped like this, well, let's put it on the Earth where gravity is higher. It's more stable now in 1G. And so to be the same amount of tippiness, the legs would be straighter. And I calculated how straight would the legs be to have the same tippiness on Earth that it actually did have on the moon. The answer is the legs straight down. If the legs were straight down, that would be the same tippiness of that vehicle that it actually experienced on the moon. So when you look at that lander, don't picture its legs going out. Picture its legs going straight down, landing on the Earth. That's how tippy that thing is. So yeah, they're giving up some stability margin by choosing that design. But even so, you can have electronics on your lander that do the navigation and do the flight controls and select an area that's good terrain to be able to land. And they believe they could do it, and I believe they could do it. They just had an unlucky break this time.
so I know that Odysseus is part of the CLIPS program and had, scientific payloads on board. Are those just like, is there anything that's going to come from those? Are they going to be able to carry
Oh,
out?
yeah. Well, I don't know how much data they got. I know that they were providing data to the payload providers. And I know that some of the commercial payload, the non-government payloads also got data. But I don't know how much they got. The one I was most interested in was Scalps. That's the stereo camera system that was going to measure the blowing soil and dust. From what I gather, the stereo cameras did not work for some reason. I just heard that as a rumor. I don't. That's not official news,
Right.
but I don't know. I mean, I've heard that they were going to have 3 cameras or 4 cameras on Scalps. I don't know how many it ended up actually being. So I'm still hoping they had some cameras that took plume blowing soil data, but I haven't heard yet. However, I did look at just the regular spacecraft images of the plume blowing the soil during descent, and you can see a lot of interesting physics in those pictures.
Is that it?
There you go. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you can see some really cool physics in that. Of course, you can see the dark rocks that are blowing, and that's interesting because if we can get an estimate of how fast the soil was blowing, then we also get an estimate of how many rocks are in the soil. Because, if it removed 1 centimeter of soil and you've got that many rocks, that gives us a calibration of rocks per centimeter of depth, over that area. And so it tells us a little bit about the geology. Oh, there's a dinosaur.
Oh, no, not the Okay.
Okay, speaking of geology, we got dinosaur fossils on the moon. But then, in addition to the rocks, you can see the generally grayish, bright gray cloud, and you can see little hints of darker areas underneath it. Those are craters. You
Hmm.
see, like the circular crater that's on the lower left side with a rock over the
Yeah,
crater.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's a crater. Now, you can see that it's a little bit darker, but not super dark. Well, if we get a picture back after the dust stops blowing, then you'll get a contrast of how bright it is outside versus inside the crater, right? And so you'll know how bright it is in the crater and outside the crater, both with and without dust. And with those 4 data points, you can actually calculate how much dust is in front of that crater. And so if you know how much dust is there, and we know how fast the rocket was blowing, then we can calculate how much dust should be over the crater as a function of this parameter. There's one parameter in the physics that we don't know yet. And so you can plug in different values of that parameter until what we predict matches what we see.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we can actually calibrate the erosion equation, which you can't do on the Earth because it's impossible to blow a sufficiently large rocket inside a vacuum chamber while maintaining vacuum with supersonic dust, which destroys vacuum pumps, and have the entire experiment inside a reduced gravity airplane. You can't do that. Um, like you could try to do some of those things, but you can't do all of them. And then you especially can't do it with real lunar soil, lunar dust that's got the actual geology of the moon. So this allows us to calibrate the physics of erosion on the moon. Just 2 pictures. This picture plus another picture after the dust clears, and so we get really important science from it. Another thing that we can get from oh, there you go. The you're going to have to do some calibration of the 2 images because it looks like the contrast and the
Wow.
exposures are not the same on the images, but hopefully they've got that metadata on the camera settings for the 2 pictures. If not, you can still, there's ways you can solve it. Like, look how the sky is not very black in this picture. But let's go back to the previous picture. Do we see any of the sky in the previous one? Um, yeah, see the sky way up in the upper left? It's actually a lot darker sky up there.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's because the camera settings are not the same. So you can actually calibrate that out to take care of it. But I think with those 2 pictures, you can actually get some really good science. But there's another thing in this picture that's really interesting.
The first one? Here we go.
Yeah. So look at the where it says intuitive machines. Go to the left a little bit, and there's this little grayish bright streak that's diagonal. I don't know if you
This
can
guy?
point at it with a mouse.
Is it this guy?
I don't see your cursor.
Oh, you
Well,
don't?
anyways, there's some gray streaks that they point back towards the footpad of the lander. I see actually like a real short one, and then I see 2 long ones, and then there's some even tinier ones that are up under the leg, like right there between the 2 legs. If you scroll it back up a little bit, no, the other way, down or up, I don't know, but yeah, right there, right between. So see the 2 footpads,
Yeah,
right between
yeah,
the 2 footpads, but a little closer to the right one. There's a gray streak. It looks like a tic tac. It's longer than a
yeah.
tic tac, but that thing right there is dust. That's just dust. It's not a rock or anything, but it's a little region of dense dust. It's denser than the dust around it, and it makes it look like it has a 3D shape. it looks like it's sticking up above the dust, but it's not really sticking up above the dust. It's inside the same dust cloud with all the other dust, but it's a little cylinder of space that has denser dust than the other dust around it. And the reason why there's denser dust right there is because up at the very top of that shape, you can't see it through the dust, but there's a rock sticking up out of the soil. And that rock is currently being undercut by the gas. And so the gas is flowing around the rock, scouring out, digging out around the rock. And eventually the rock's going to come free. And once that rock comes free, it'll look like all the other rocks you see. And see, all those other rocks don't have those dust tails attached to it. It's
Right.
just the rock that's still attached to the soil that hasn't been liberated yet, that's got the gas digging it out. See, that rock, even though you can't see the rock, we know it's there because we see that cylinder of dense dust. All that dense dust is being released at a higher density because that's where the rock is being exhumed. And so whenever you see that happening, you can tell two things. First of all, you know about the width of the rock because the width of the rock is equal to the width of that dust tail. And you also can tell how long the rock has been getting undercut because the length of the dust tail. As soon as it started getting dug out, that dust tail started, and then it's going with the gas, getting longer and longer. And then when the rock gets free, that dust tail is going to blow away, and it won't be making the dust tail anymore. So that length of that dust tail tells you how long the rock has been undergoing excavation. And so you see some of these tails are longer than others. But you can count them and look at how long they are and get statistics on how often rocks get dug out. And so that gives us information. If you assume the rocks are roughly round, which is an approximation, but it's not a horrible approximation. If you assume they're approximately round, then the width of it is equal to the thickness of it. And so the length of the dust tail until the rock gets released tells you how long the soil took to get lowered to that depth. It's digging out the rock, and now it's dug out to that depth and the rock gets loose. And so it stops making the dust tail. So those dust tails tell us a lot about how the soil is being eroded, how fast it's being eroded, and how many rocks of different sizes are in the soil right there. So even from a picture like this, you can actually get a lot of really cool physics.
Wow, that's incredible. From just a picture, you're seeing a lot more than I am. The picture's worth maybe, 10,000 words for you.
Well, I've
Um,
spent like 25 years staring at these pictures trying to figure it out.
um, Michael, thank you for this super chat. I'm not exactly sure. Ellie and Dr. M, IM suspects, so Intuitive Machine suspects Odysseus landed in an up incline or a rock, so that is still above horizontal. Do you know? Maybe a little bit is lost in
Yeah,
translation.
I haven't sorted that through. I've been reading what Scott Manley says. It looks like he's been paying very close attention to it and sorting it all out. But the little bit that I've read, it looks to me like the lander is at like a 30-degree angle.
Yes.
I'm guessing 30-degree from horizontal, although some people have said 30 degrees from vertical. I don't know. But yeah, it either landed on a slope or it landed with his head on a rock. So it didn't go all the way down, apparently. Maybe that has helped them to get some of the communication link, so they could get some of the data back. Maybe it helped a little bit.
So, as I understand, in 3 weeks, Odie could get enough solar power generated to come back to life, correct?
Yeah. So when I was at NASA 20 years ago, no spacecraft had ever survived the lunar night, and without heating. We put payloads on the moon during Apollo, and they had nuclear power on nuclear decay to provide power, but nobody ever knew if you could let a spacecraft that was solar powered go to sleep in the super cold lunar night, which is really cold. When you're in the desert and the sun goes down, it gets really cold because the dry air doesn't hold the heat in very well. But when there's no air, it's even worse. It's like way worse than a desert because all the heat goes out and it gets super cold on the moon. And so we back in NASA, back in those days, we used to think that it was impossible. Nothing would survive the lunar night. And we were always talking about what can we do to solve this problem? Well, finally, the Chinese lander, like Chang'e 3, had a little rover, the U-2 rover. And if I recall, it woke up after the first lunar night. Now, I've heard conflicting stories about how functional it was. Did everything wake up? Was everything still functional? I don't know. But when it woke up again, everybody was thinking, wow, that's pretty amazing. We didn't know that could happen. And then the Japanese Slim lander that's on the moon right now, it just woke up again. So we've seen at least 2 cases of vehicles that are able to get more sunlight after the lunar night and come back alive. So yeah, Odysseus might do this as well. That'd be really cool if it does.
Yeah. Mark wants to know, why did they go with 6 legs instead of 3 like Surveyor?
Yeah, I don't know the design decisions. I really don't know. Maybe it was mechanical loading. It had to carry a certain amount of weight, not only on the moon but also during launch, and it had to carry the payloads and the propellant. So maybe it was a structural analysis. Um, maybe maybe it was because to fit the payload fairing in the rocket, they couldn't have longer legs, so that was as long as they could make them. And so maybe they weren't able to get as long, of an angle as they wanted. And so to make up for that, they just had to go with more legs to bear the load. That's what I would guess. But there's another thing: a 6-legged or a 4 or 5, it's more stable than just a 3-legged. I mean, if you have 3 legs, then if you just add more legs between them, it just makes it harder for the vehicle to tip over.
Hmm.
So it does increase the static stability. Then you can get into discussions about what if one leg breaks. So a 3-legged vehicle, if one leg breaks, it's going to go down. A 4-legged vehicle, if one leg breaks, it's not stable. It might get lucky and balance, but it could fall over. A 5-legged is marginally, like if you have a diamond ring, if you have 5 prongs, you can lose a prong and the ring won't get lost, but it's borderline. 6 prongs or 6 legs gives you a degree of margin so that if you lose one, you're really sure that you could stay up. Now, okay, they lost a leg and they didn't stay up, but there was a lot going on. It was during the dynamics of landing. It was on a slope. There may have been a rock. I heard a rumor maybe more than one leg got damaged, but that's not official. That was just somebody on Twitter speculating. But there was a lot going on. But in general, 6 legs does give you more margin for stability.
Right, right. Ross wants to know, and I don't know if you know all the answers, but I'm going to ask him anyway. How did Intuitive Machines manage to avoid boil off of cryogenic propellant on their small Odysseus lander for days after launch?
Yeah, I don't know the details of their design, but I do know that time was of the essence. It's not like other missions where you could just loiter forever,
Right.
because there is a boil off rate. Unless you've got active cryogenic cooling on your vehicle to continuously take the heat out fast enough, then you are going to be boiling off and losing propellant. And so you've got to have an extra margin of propellant. You've got to allow for the boil off. And so it must have, I'm just speculating, but it must have been in their mission design requirements that once they got into space, they had to be able to land within a certain number of days, because after that, you're not guaranteed to have enough propellant left over. Now, when you design a spacecraft, the way it works is you have top level requirements, and then you say, okay, to meet our top level requirements, the rocket has to do this, the lander has to do this, the payload has to do this. And then, okay, you take the rocket requirements, the propulsion system has to do this, the mechanical structural system has to, and so you flow the requirements down. At every step along the way, they usually put a little bit of margin in. And then when you get to the final bottom tier and you're building that piece, they try to exceed the margin, so now every piece had design margin to begin with, and then it has as built margin on top of that. And so when you flow it all back up, yeah, we met it. By the time you get back to the top, you usually have quite a bit of margin built in. And so even though they may have said we only have 2 days or we only have 3 days, oftentimes you can actually squeeze out an extra day or two, because of all the margin that ended up. So I don't know any of the details at all, but I would assume that they were tracking it, where they were finding out how well it performed in real time. We designed it, we expected it to be this good, might have actually been better. So maybe they weren't boiling off as fast as they thought, but they were probably working in real time, making the decisions. I can't give a specific answer. It comes down to insulation. And by the way, let me say, methane and oxygen are not the worst. They're actually pretty good to deal with in space. They do boil off. Oxygen has to be kept pretty darn cold, but the bad one is hydrogen. And so if you're not dealing with hydrogen, it's a lot easier, to provide insulation to keep the cryogens from boiling off too fast.
So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I guess we'll have to stay tuned and see if Odie wakes up in a few weeks. But here's my analysis with Dr. Phil Metzger of the lunar lander Odysseus. I wanted to wait to talk to someone who definitely has more experience in this area. So I hope that you enjoyed it. If you do, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to Ellie in Space, and I'll see you soon.